Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, the Supreme Court ruling President Trump cannot block the release of his financial records from prosecutors in New York. Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace weighs in on the potential political effects of the High Court's split decision, the surge in coronavirus cases, and the discussion over whether schools should return to an in-person session this fall. And tech companies like Facebook and Twitter are facing heat for their content moderation policies. That while the U.S. is considering banning the wildly popular video app TikTok over concerns American user data could end up in the hands of the Chinese government. Fox News Headlines 24/7 anchor and host of Fox on Tech, Brett Larson, shares his insight on this and the ongoing debate over regulating social media. Plus commentary by Fox News contributor Kat Timpf. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Greg Jarrett.
I'm Shannon Bream.
I'm Steve Ducey, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Friday, July 10th, 2020. I'm Chris Foster. The Supreme Court rules on President Trump's financial records and coronavirus cases are still going up. Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace says,
"This is very troubling. I mean, this is a new spike in the very first wave. This isn't a second wave. This is still in the first wave of the virus."
I'm Jessica Rosenthal. Facebook ad boycotts, a TikTok ban, a Twitter competitor. Social media may be changing, and big tech is being challenged over its big power.
Lawmakers have their work cut out for them heading into this. I hope that they know what it is they want, and I hope they understand what it is these companies are doing.
And I'm Kat Timpf. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
The Supreme Court rules in a pair of cases that President Trump in this case, do not have blanket immunity against investigation. It allows prosecutors in New York, but not House Democrats yet, access to his financial records for now. Both cases go back to lower courts, with prosecutors in New York allowed to request the documents as they would with any other citizen. The courts handling the congressional cases that previously ruled in favor of the subpoenas are told to consider more fully the separation of power between the president and Congress. President Trump complains about the rulings.
From a certain point, I'm satisfied. From another point, I'm not satisfied because, frankly, this is a political witch hunt, the likes of which nobody's ever seen before. It's a pure witch hunt. It's a hoax.
In any case, for the president, his records remain private for the time being, a little less than 4 months until the election.
I'm not sure on the New York grand jury subpoena. We'll have to wait and see how quickly all of that gets disposed of. Certainly in terms of the congressional subpoenas, this isn't going to affect the election.
Chris Wallace is the host of Fox News Sunday.
The principle that's been set here is that a president is not, and there was a very broad claim of immunity by the president's lawyers, that the president is not immune from any subpoenas. He's not, in effect, above the law. The question is, what is, in this case of the New York grand jury, the New York prosecutor, the district attorney Cyrus Vance, what does he have to show in terms of the reason why the president's records need to be made available? But a blanket statement of immunity, the court threw that out on a 7-2 ruling.
So it could be a very short-term win for the president. The accountants have said, we're ready to go. We have this stuff all compiled. So it could happen relatively quickly. Turning to coronavirus, President Trump, again, is complaining that our cases are high because of the testing. Now, obviously, we know how many cases there are because of the testing, but the same number of people would have been sick if we weren't testing anybody. And as you've said many times, you can't spin the virus.
No, and the number of cases have gone up by X percent, but the number of tests, but the number of cases have gone up by almost 2x, almost double the rate. So that's an indication that the virus is spreading, not just that we're testing more people, so we're finding more people with the virus. The positivity rate is going up, and hospitalizations, while well down from the peak back in March and April, are rising as well. And you're seeing in a number of these states, Arizona and Texas and Florida, that ICU beds are almost at capacity. So this is very troubling. I mean, this is a new spike in the very first wave. This isn't a second wave. This is still in the first wave of the virus. And you just look at the graphs, and there was this big curve. We were talking about bending the curve, and we bent it down by the end of April, and now in May and June, it really has begun to go up and is higher than it's ever been. I think we had 60,000 new cases yesterday. That's astonishing.
Yeah, and what's disheartening to me is that at least nationally, has all this time been wasted? Has all this economic pain and whatever psychic pain just been for nothing in the last 3 months?
Well, I mean, in certain places, it seems to have benefited. You look at New York, you look at most of the Northeast, which had the brunt of it and did the most stringent mitigation processes, lockdowns, closing cities and states up. They're doing pretty well. I mean, New York and the amazing story. I know it's small, but Rhode Island, in terms of the beating the virus there. But, it's just the places that were the slowest to close and the earliest to reopen, and that's basically the South and the Southwest. They didn't go through all of that pain then. They're going through all of it now.
This mask war, which for many people has turned into politics, I hear a lot of people saying, they don't work. It's just the government trying to control you. I wonder if the federal government messed up in the beginning. Remember, in the beginning, you don't need a mask. Don't bother. And now, of course, they're changing course.
Well, it's not just a question of the law, and you could have passed a law. I mean, we have laws in this country that you have to wear a seatbelt. You could certainly argue that's an infringement on personal liberty. But the states or federal government have decided that it is in the interest of safety. It's in the interest of protecting you. It's in the interest of protecting somebody else whose car you might hit, that we should all wear safety belts, and you get a fine if you don't wear a safety belt. Whether we should have done that in masks, I don't know that we necessarily would have had the time, but it certainly seems to me that the message from the central government, from the federal government, and from states could have been a lot stronger. In other words, maybe it wouldn't have been the law, but there should have been a sort of moral shame to not wearing a mask. I just have never understood it. I understand the argument about I have personal freedom to choose not to wear a mask. I don't understand why anybody would choose not to wear a mask. It just is a matter of caring for yourself, and more importantly, caring for the people around you. I don't get I don't know what the counter argument is. Whether it's your choice or not, I don't understand why you would choose not to wear a mask.
Well, I guess just the discomfort of it, at least for me, and something else we've talked about in the past is that you can't decouple the health concerns from the economic concerns. If I have to wear a mask when I do this or that, I'm not going to do it just because I find the mask uncomfortable.
Well, but I mean, if the mask meant that you would thereby be able to go back to work and the company would be able to get back in business, I don't know. I mean, is it uncomfortable? It's not great, but I don't. It's not torture either.
It's not torture. The president wants schools open. Joe Biden says he wants schools open. It's important economically with parents having to work and maybe can't afford childcare, and some kids that's the best meal they get. And there's the social development of it, but it's a really tough aspect of all this.
Well, it is, and what concerns me is, it may well be that we can open schools, and I understand this. I don't have young kids, thank God, anymore. I've been through that period in my life, but I do have friends who've got young kids, and it's brutal because they're trying to do their job by teleworking. At the same time, they're trying to take care of their kid, and they're trying to get their kid to look at the computer and do virtual learning. And I gather from my friends, even my kids, with my grandkids, that that's hard to get them to pay attention, and that the virtual learning is not the most interesting or educational experience for these kids. On the other hand, as we've said, you can't spin the virus, and for instance, the CDC came out with some guidelines which struck me as pretty good. I really do think we need to get kids back in school, but can we get them all back 5 days a week, classrooms, 30, 35 kids in a class? That's a real question. And the CDC said, they need to be 6 feet apart. They need to wear masks. If you have to split up the school day and they don't go for all 8 hours, they go for 4 hours, and each one goes in the morning and one goes in the afternoon. And now they're saying, well, no, the CDC is going to come out with new guidelines. If that's a health decision, I'm fine with it. If it's a political decision, I got a problem with that.
The Democratic convention was supposed to be next week, believe it or not, and now it's not going to be much of one. The Republicans might not get their wish for anything like a normal convention either.
No, I mean, right now, are you going to put 4,000 people in an arena in Jacksonville, Florida, when it's spiking and they've got all-time highs every day, both in cases and hospitalizations? We have no idea how this political year is going to play out, both in terms of the logistics of it, conventions, debates, campaigning, voting, and we have no idea how it's going to play out in terms of how all of those and many other factors will affect how people choose to vote, not only for president, but for a number of down-ballot races as well.
Yeah, it's not like those conventions are going to convince anybody to vote for or against President Trump or Joe Biden. It's just something that we've done. Something we've also done is college football. The Ivy League is now saying no fall sports at all, punting everything until at least January. Other schools have called off workouts. Are they going to have college football in the South?
Boy, that'd be brutal, huh? I mean, Alabama, LSU, things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the joys is watching SEC football on Saturday afternoons. I would hate to lose it, but we've learned to live without a bunch of things, and that may be something else that we have to sacrifice. I just hope they'll make the right decision, and the right long-term decision, not the right short-term decision.
Chris Wallace, host of Fox News Sunday. Thank you very much, Chris. Talk to you next week.
Thank you, Chris.
This is Kat Timpf with your Fox News commentary. Coming up.
Social media and tech companies are going through it right now. Twitter's latest actions flagging the president's tweets have given a boost to a competitor. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told Fox News host Laura Ingraham they're talking about banning TikTok.
We're taking this very seriously. We're certainly looking at it. We've worked on this very issue for a long time.
Would you recommend that people download that app on their phones tonight, tomorrow, anytime currently?
Only if you want your private information in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party.
Major companies are boycotting Facebook after some employees said they're disappointed in how the companies handled certain speech, especially President Trump's, during this sensitive time of protests. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg had previously explained his philosophy to Fox News host Dana Perino.
I don't think that we want private companies censoring politicians in the news. I generally believe that as a principle, people should decide what is credible and what they want to believe and who they want to vote for. I don't think that should be something that we want tech companies or any kind of other company doing.
A debate has been underway for a while now about the protection social media companies get under something called Section 230. That is part of the Telecommunications Act, and it shields internet companies from liability from a third party's content. But after Twitter flagged President Trump's tweets starting in May, the president said perhaps this Section 230 should be limited, and he signed an executive order. The Justice Department, under Attorney General Bill Barr, has proposed changes to how this liability protection is applied. Barr told Fox Business anchor Maria Bartiromo last month, Section 230 allows a social media company to act as like a bulletin board for everyone, while also allowing platforms to take down obscene or offensive material.
And so what we said was in the law, Section 230, if you take that down, that doesn't make you a publisher. If you take down objectionable material like that. Unfortunately, they started taking down viewpoints and started really being selective and based on whether they agreed with the viewpoint or not, taking it down. And that should make them a publisher.
It's not just the social media companies that are being scrutinized. Tech companies generally are being called out for antitrust concerns and allegations. Later this month, the CEOs of Apple, Google, and Amazon and others will testify before the House Judiciary Committee.
This is not the first time that big tech has been, drawn to D.C. to talk about antitrust. We saw it with Microsoft back in the late 90s.
Brett Larson is a Fox News Headlines 24/7 anchor and host of Fox on Tech.
Interesting, when we saw it with Microsoft back in the late 90s, they were talking about just how Microsoft integrated everything into Windows, so you couldn't, if you were a competitor, if you were like Netscape, a competitive web browser, it was harder for you to gain access to the desktop. So here we are again. And Now it seems a little bit different in terms of the companies involved, the number of companies involved. A lot of people point to that antitrust investigation in the late 90s as where Microsoft sort of tripped and missed where Google came in and took over in search and took over in providing documents and spreadsheets and all of this stuff for free online. So it kind of took the power away from Microsoft Office, and Microsoft Office was in its day like the gold standard of everything. And now you have to wonder who is waiting in the wings while these giant companies are going to have the federal government going through everything that they're doing, every move that they make.
Well, and my question really is, when we talk about it now, right?
Yeah.
And you have the CEOs of Apple and Amazon and Google coming out to testify. I imagine if you're pressing Apple on an antitrust allegation, it's going to be a very different allegation than one against Amazon, and especially, look at Google in the ad space. You're talking. You just referenced Google being free, giving free Google Docs, but the ad space is different. Where do we suspect lawmakers will go as they push each of these different companies?
And this is always the problem. Lawmakers don't understand this technology at all. We saw it in the hearings last year when Mark Zuckerberg was on Capitol Hill. You literally had a senator asking him how Facebook makes money. And that's comical to me, because how do you not know that? If you are sitting down with the CEO of a company and you don't know how his company makes money, something's wrong here. This is going to be unique because we have these massive players in technology, but they've each kind of carved out their own space. Google provides web search and free email. And it's not free. It's free to you're not paying money for it, but they're making money off of you. You're not really the customer. You're the product. Yeah. Amazon is the dominant player in delivery of anything you want, from books to whatever you need in the bedroom to now they do groceries. And then you have Apple, and Apple's always an interesting twist on the antitrust front because Apple controls the entire process. They make the computers, they make the software that runs on the computers, they own the stores where the computers are sold. They're very controlling about who else can sell their products. But it's a hard argument to say that Apple is a monopoly because, and I think this is kind of what they always say is, well, you have other options. You can buy an Android smartphone. You can buy a Windows desktop. So that's kind of how they skirt around this. They don't have the largesse to say, they're not 51% of the market in any aspect, though they have sold billions of devices. So lawmakers have their work cut out for them heading into this. I hope that they know what it is they want, and I hope they understand what it is these companies are doing.
Did you hear some of the Republicans say that the CEO of Parler has now been invited to come to this hearing? It's apparently in a letter that asks him to weigh in on the state of competition in social media.
And that's going to be an interesting thing to hear. When it comes to social media, you really only have one player. You have Facebook. Everybody's on it. They have over 2 billion users worldwide. There is no alternative to Facebook and what Facebook offers. Facebook is, they're dealing with the advertising crisis, if you want to call it that, but they still have the shooting fish in a barrel kind of way of advertising. You can so hyper target your advertisements on Facebook that it becomes it's money well spent. And that's become a challenge to traditional media players, TV and radio. They may have the reach. You may have 1 million people watching a primetime television show, but the advertisements that you're going to see on that primetime television show are pretty broad stroke ads. Bringing another player to the table, I think, is good. I just wish that there was an alternative to Facebook. I think what Facebook is decent. I like you can stay connected with your friends, you can share photos, you can share what's going on with your life. I don't like what it has become in terms of what it allows people to do, that you can amplify hate and you can spread misinformation. I think that's really quite bad, and I think Facebook has kind of failed at addressing that.
The president got pretty, upset, I think is the right word, when Twitter flagged or sort of hid some of his tweets. Yeah. One of them was when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Another said an autonomous zone in D.C. would be met with serious force. What do we know about why Twitter suddenly started to, I guess, flag these tweets and what it sort of comes down to in terms of their policy?
Twitter, I think, I don't know who they were whose pressure they were bowing to, but I think they were just sort of saying, okay, we do this to everybody else. If I, Brett Larson, tweeted out something when the looting starts, the shooting starts, that might be flagged as inciting violence. And if other people did that, it would also be flagged as inciting violence. So I think what Twitter did is they just sort of separated the person from the message and said, well, the message is inciting violence. And okay, yeah, it came from the president. Too bad. We're going to put a veil over this tweet. And if you want to read it, you got to click through. And I know that, he got very upset and passed an executive order about it.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because this executive order, I imagine if, the Attorney General Barr, and this executive order gets taken any further, I'm not really sure how much further it could be taken. I think Congress would need to be involved, but it does look at limiting or curbing Section 230, right? And
yes.
And I want to get into that for just briefly for a second. Section 230 has been called the 26 words that created the internet.
Yeah.
What essentially does it do for companies? Briefly.
It basically says if you're a website and you have, say, a forum where people can go and post reviews or opinions or, post your comments like you do on Facebook and Twitter, Facebook and Twitter or the site, the operator of the site is not responsible for the content because it's not theirs. It's saying
a third party's.
It's you come in. If you go on Yelp, if you, Jessica, you go on Yelp, you write a review about a restaurant. That's your opinion. That's not Yelp's opinion. That's kind of in a nutshell what Section 230 allows for. If it was undone, it would certainly be interesting to see how everybody from Amazon to Facebook to Yelp handle the fact that their business model is built around people creating content that they don't want to be legally liable for. And that's...
Would they even exist as we know them now?
I don't think that they would. I think that they may exist in a way where you would, there would definitely be more steps that you would have to take to become a member. If you were...
Is that where the pay for model where the subscribe and pay for model would probably come into play more?
Absolutely. And, the thing we saw from the very, very early beginnings of the internet back in the late 90s is the internet, just to kind of get it out the door, everything needed to be free. It needed to be ad supported and it needed to be free. And we all really liked it. And we all loved AOL. We all loved paying $9 a month or whatever it was. But we really liked that first month when it was free. And that, that would, you'd kind of have to change that. If the government suddenly said to Yelp, okay, if somebody posts a negative review and the company that is being reviewed wants to sue, they're going to sue Yelp. They're not going to sue the person. We would have a change.
As we're talking about government involvement in social media, I don't know if there's any more stark an example of government involvement than the Secretary of State talking about maybe banning TikTok.
That is huge.
Yeah, it's a relatively new social media company, but I remember Zuckerberg a couple years ago saying, guys, this is owned by the Chinese. It's not a free speech platform. The Hong Kong protests are not going to be on TikTok. You're not going to see any evidence of that. And I'm just wondering, I see Australia's talking about banning it.
India banned it.
Yeah, and this would be huge if we took this kind of measure, right? A national security measure to ban a social media platform.
It would be a huge step, and it would be interesting. But yes, TikTok is it is owned by a Chinese company, and as the Secretary of State has rightly pointed out many times, if you're a Chinese company, you are run by the Chinese government, and the Chinese government is communist. And we had an issue. I forget the name of the app. That it was a face app that you could make you look old. It could make you look like your sister. It could make you look like a younger version of you. It was also owned by the Chinese, and people were using it, and it turned out they were using it to spy on us. So it is not out of the realm of possibilities that an app from China on our smartphone is probably not a good idea.
Brett Larson, thank you so much for your time.
Jessica Rosenthal, always a pleasure.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network, subscribe and listen to the Trey Gowdy Podcast. Former federal prosecutor and 4-term U.S. Congressman from South Carolina brings you a one-of-a-kind podcast. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com. Subscribe to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com.
And now, some good news with Tonya J. Powers.
A Puerto Rican family is back home again after an airline came to the rescue. The Santiago Rodriguez family was traveling with Spirit Airlines from San Juan to Philadelphia on June 30th when their 4-year-old daughter had a medical emergency on the flight. As a result, the flight was forced to divert to the Turks and Caicos so she could get medical help. She recovered, but the family's travel issues were not over. You see, the family did not have their passports because they aren't required when flying between Puerto Rico, which is a U.S. territory, and the mainland. That meant that they didn't have the proper documentation when it came time to leave Turks and Caicos. It's not the only problem they ran into either. Commercial flights in Turks and Caicos haven't reopened to travelers yet. So Spirit came to the rescue, finding them a place to stay. The girl's mother says their luggage was still on that flight to Philadelphia, which meant they had none of their clothes with them, which Spirit also helped with. She says she's thankful. The airline even got permission to send an empty plane to pick the family up and fly them back to Puerto Rico. Spirit's communication manager said in a news release the airline was, quote, very happy to have been able to help the Santiago Rodriguez family return home and offer them a sense of peace after a moment of anguish. Tonya J. Powers, Fox News.
It's time for your Fox News commentary. Kat Timpf. What's on your mind?
I may not have attended Harvard, but even I know that spending $50,000 for a year of online classes is probably not the smartest thing to do. And yet, that seems to be exactly what the best and brightest cream of the crop students at that very school will be doing in the fall. In case you haven't heard, Harvard University has announced that it's going to be doing things differently next semester because of the coronavirus pandemic. Although 40% of the student body, including all first-year students, will be living on campus, quote, all course instruction, undergraduate and graduate for the 2020-21 academic year will be delivered online. It's a huge change for sure, but there's one thing that will remain the same. The tuition cost will stay the usual $49,653 for anyone living off campus, and the full cost will remain $72,356 for those living there, even though they'll be learning online. In other words, Harvard's offering a completely different product from what it's offered in the past, a model of education, by the way, that they have next to no experience in facilitating, and still charging the same price. This is a crazy offer. And what's even crazier is that some people are actually going to go for it. Now, I don't call it crazy just because I think that anything costing $50,000 should at the very least be something that gets you off your couch. I mean, I do think that, yes, but I also believe that the price tag to attend these prestigious Ivy League institutions was already stupidly high, even under the operating procedures of the before times when that classroom experience was included. By the way, this view isn't just some kind of abstract talking point for me either. Rather, it's the path that I myself chose when weighing my own options for my own life. I was accepted into a Columbia University graduate program when I was 21 years old. Just weeks before I was supposed to move across the country, though, I decided that whatever I learned there could never be worth saddling myself with debt to afford its price tag. Although many people called me crazy at the time, this was absolutely the right move, and I still consider it to be one of the best decisions that I've ever made in my life. The small amount of debt that I took on for my undergraduate degree is already paid off, and my career is going far better than I could have ever even imagined to be going right now. To be clear, I understand that things have changed because of this pandemic. I understand that we can't just snap our fingers and do things the way we used to be able to do them. When it comes to the way we view higher education in this country, though, I think that might be more of an opportunity than a burden. We've needed to reevaluate the way our culture treats higher education for quite some time now, and this situation could be just what we need to kick that discussion into high gear. Even if you disagree and you're one of those people who believe that there's another thing that makes the high price of Harvard worth it, that it really truly has offered the best education money can buy, then you still have to acknowledge that this may not be the case under current conditions. We all already understand that there are many different kinds of education and that attending some fancy undergraduate or graduate school is just one of them. For some people, especially those who don't have to worry about the money, it's an excellent option, sure, but it's far from the only option or even the best option for every single person. And there really hasn't been a better time than now to embrace just how true that is. I'm Kat Timpf.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust, and click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.